Alright, so here's the dilemma I'm facing currently, and I'm sure many other up-and-coming content creators have faced this dilemma at one point or another when they first started making videos. You thought long and hard about what the first official video you want to make, put time and effort into, and release is going to be like, right? So you release it and you're happy with the product, that's fine and all, but where do you go from there? I started to think long and hard about this after I put up my first quote-unquote official video on my channel expressing concerns about a potentially botched remaster. And don't worry, I'll be sure to give this thing a stern talking to when I get there. But I was still drawing blanks about what I would talk about afterwards. I could talk about Halo, seeing as how I started to binge through all of the mainline Halo titles recently, and I'm confident my opinions on the series won't make anyone irrationally angry at all. Though I decided to postpone that inevitable video until later because I still have Halo 5 to play through, Halo Infinite when that game arrives, and the Halo Wars games, I guess? I don't know what these are. But it did get me thinking about retrospectives in general. I have a lot of retrospectives I aim to get to sometime in the future. But one of the biggest catalogs of game retrospectives I have tucked away in storage are for none other than Sonic the Hedgehog.
I can't figure you out. One second you're contemplating genocide, and the next you're saving one of your worst enemies!
I think it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of Sonic and constantly keep up with everything he's put out over the years, but for this particular retrospective I wanted to start out with something not mainline, a bit on the small side, though whether you consider these titles to be small or not is up for debate. That's right, today I'm going to look back at the Sumo Digital Sonic Racing Trilogy.
I have arranged for you to meet.
Alright, sure, the series is not technically specifically Sonic-oriented, somewhat, but hey, it has Sonic in it, and it has a lot of his franchise represented, so it counts by me. Plus, in all honesty, I've been wanting to compile my thoughts on these games into a cohesive video for a long while now. Sonic has other racing games besides these, of course. I've been meaning to take another look at the Sonic Riders series for a while, and I do mean the whole series. There's, Sonic R, the Sonic Drift games. Man, for a fast character, he shared a hard time making an actually good racing game at the start of his career, huh? The whole SEGA All-Stars deal technically started all the way back in 2004 as SEGA Superstars, released on the PlayStation 2. The game was developed by none other than Sonic Team themselves, and the game was controlled using the iToy. Yeah, remember that deal? The iToy? And how insanely popular it was? Smash hit with families all over the world? No? Yeah, figures. It was basically a minigame collection where you used the camera to partake in various activities, all of which included a variety of SEGA franchises, of course. Later on down the line, instead of Sonic Team, Sumo Digital would be tasked to create a crossover tennis game with a bunch of SEGA franchises. SEGA Superstars Tennis. I do own this game for the record, but I haven't played it yet, so I can't really give you my thoughts on it, but from what I could gather, the reception to it appears to be decent, so I'll leave it at that. It seemed to have done well anyway, because not too long after, Sumo was tasked again to create another game with all these various SEGA franchises in mind, but this time they were asked to turn it into a kart racer. Thus, in 2010, Sumo Digital gifted us Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing.
Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing!
Hey, I just said that. In hindsight, it made all the sense in the world for Sumo Digital to turn this series into a kart racer, considering their previous work on titles like Outrun. Good to stick to what you know best. I remember playing this game on the Wii a ton as a kid back in 2010. I still own a copy of the game today, as a matter of fact, though the footage you'll see will be recorded from the PC version, and this sure is an interesting PC port. Not even any achievements on Steam, that was surprising. Even Bad Rats has Steam achievements. Guess we know which game is on top, huh? Of course, the console versions get specific characters that the PC version doesn't. Xbox has Banjo-Kazooie, but in their, in my opinion, rather unpleasant-looking nuts and bolts reincarnation, and avatars. The Wii has the Miis, of course, and was apparently going to include Mario early on in development, but Sega turned down the idea as to not cross-contaminate the ongoing Mario and Sonic at the Olympics series. That really doesn't make any sense to me, but whatever, at least they had the Miis, I guess. Now Sony, on the other hand, they didn't get anything on this deal, they got flat out jibbed. Bit of a sidetrack, but I feel that this is interesting enough to warrant bringing up. Fans instantly noticed Knight's absence as a playable racer among the showcased roster and demanded for their inclusion in the game. And apparently this commotion is what prompted Sumo Digital to actually add Knights into the game. But not as a racer. See, the game was already so far in development, so Sumo understandably really couldn't add them in as a racer, so instead, they made Knights as the flag bearer in a nice little cameo. That's pretty neat. Anyway, getting into the actual game itself, it's the standard kart racing affair. You have multiple playable characters, drifting, items at your disposal, wacky track shenanigans. Everything you'd expect in a mascot kart racer is here and accounted for. You get a good variety of SEGA franchises mixed in. Sonic, of course, alongside Super Monkey Ball, Space Channel 5, Jet Set Radio, Alex Kidd, Billy Hatcher, Samba de Amigo, House of the Dead, Choo Choo Rocket, and Fantasy Zone, among other franchises. Even lesser-known SEGA characters like the Bonanza Brothers are in this game, all represented by either racers or racetracks. Yeah, a quick disclaimer for what I said earlier. House of the Dead was apparently banned in Germany at the time, amongst a huge assortment of other titles. God dang, Germany. So they couldn't include the actual name of the franchise, they just had to put Curian Mansion as the series label. Even when viewing the racer's profile, they had to abbreviate the series' title name. Oh man, my favorite franchise. HODTD. I did have some fond memories of playing the first All-Stars racing game as a kid, and I am pleased to report that upon replaying the first title years later, I found Sonic and SEGA All-Stars Racing to be extremely... Yeah, I don't like this game much anymore, sorry. But you know what? It's not entirely the game's fault here. It's very clear that Sumo Digital basically used this game as a means to test the waters, if you will, to experiment and see what aspects work, what didn't, and improve upon them with later sequels, which they absolutely did. But I'll talk more about those games later on. Things like this tend to happen a lot, and that's not really a bad thing, it's just hindsight. And what's here isn't bad at all, actually, so for their first attempt, I'd say they did a pretty bang-up job. With that being said, this game still absolutely drained me when I recently played it, so I feel a civic duty to tear into it like wrapping paper on Christmas Day. I said before it feels like a standard kart racing affair, but I need to emphasize the standard part of that last sentence because it really doesn't have that much going for it. With All-Stars Racing, the best way I could describe it is that it feels like a less polished Mario Kart without the super wacky, frustrating items. Basic, not very interesting, but overall well crafted enough to where you can look at it on a surface level and go, yeah, this isn't awful, I guess. You know, I don't really like Mario Kart at all, but at the very least there's this sense of polish and weight that the cars have, and the tracks can be very interesting layout-wise, especially in the later games. But that isn't really the case at all in All-Stars Racing. All of the vehicles you control here feel extremely floaty, like there's not really a big sense of weight across most of the vehicles, so the general driving around already feels fairly unsatisfying. There are three types of vehicles characters can have. There's the standard car, basically the all-around vehicle, though some cars vary in size and handling. The hovercraft, the cars that hover slightly above the ground and get much more airtime while in the air with how floaty they are at the cost of much sloppier handling. Yeah, I really don't like this vehicle type. These in particular further emphasize the floaty nature of the controls. And bikes, which are, honestly just better cars in this game. There's not really any downsides to them. They apparently get bullied by other vehicle types, but I genuinely don't see it, especially since 99% of the time you're going to be far ahead of the competition with bikes. Side note, but apparently during development they were going to have Sonic race on foot while other characters raced on vehicles with various designs and forms, but they scrapped this as it didn't really make sense visually, especially when the racers on foot started drifting. I mean, I think it makes sense with Sonic, but that's a discussion for another day. Just an interesting tidbit I thought I'd bring up. I see a lot of people praise or point out every character being in a unique, different vehicle as a positive, but personally I don't really see this as a plus, because if anything, this just showcases how unbalanced the character roster is. Take a character like Dr. Eggman, for example. I would easily classify him as the absolute worst character in the entire game by a long shot next to the Choo-Choos, I guess. And he's generally not very fun to use because of it. His turning is slow, his acceleration and general speed is slow, his hitbox is gargantuan, making it easy to nail him with items repeatedly, and because of his aforementioned slow speed, he often can't take shortcuts that other vehicles can take with ease, even with speed boosting items, putting him at a massive disadvantage by default. Conversely, look at a character like Shadow, who has basically no downsides to him whatsoever and is bar none one of the best characters in the entire game. Amazing speed, small vehicle frame, great handling, he's literally the whole package. All the system really does is just make a lot of characters either not fun to control or just flat out better than other characters entirely. It ends up being super unbalanced, like I said. In terms of the items, they almost all feel like half-baked Mario Kart reskins. Green projectile that shoots forward and bounces off surfaces, yellow mines that trip up players that drive over them, red projectiles that home in on rivals, basic speed boost, item that messes with opponents' vision. These are all literally just Mario Kart item reskins, and what's worse is that there's not really much flair to them. Let me explain. With Mario Kart, the items were at the very least tied to the game's own universe. You got speed boosts with mushrooms, the projectiles were mostly shells. These items were already in Mario's world, so turning them into weapons already feels much more natural and cohesive. Here you have Sonic shoes for speed boost and the energy shield for, well, a shield, which is fine, I guess. That makes sense. But then you have green boxing gloves, traffic cone mines, rainbows. These are like generic cartoon items. Why not make the items come from various SEGA games? Have the shield be a monkey ball, have the rainbow be a Jet Set Radio graffiti tag, and have it clutter your screen when you drive over it. That would be cool. It's not necessarily a huge detraction or even a needed feature, but it would be pretty nice to have and make everything thematically cohesive for items anyway. The items themselves, as I said before, basically function exactly like the Mario Kart items, but with somehow less impact. Like when you get hit by an item, you briefly spin out, but you go right back to driving as if nothing ever happened, with not much of a speed decrease. It's more of a slight annoyance than anything game-changing. This especially applies to the rainbow item. How they thought this was actually distracting to the player in any way is beyond me. On the plus, I guess it lacks the frustrating element Mario Kart items have, that there's just no punch or effectiveness to any of them at all due to how little of an impact they have on moment-to-moment gameplay. But hey, props to them for implementing a horn item a whole 4 years before Mario Kart did. That's gotta count for something, I suppose. The one exception to the whole the items in this game aren't effective thing is the All-Star move. You get this randomly, usually when you're in dead last or a similar position, and it's basically a unique super move each character has where they get to accelerate rapidly along the track and cause everyone to be squashed in their wake. I do really mean unique too, because each All-Star is different and unique to that specific character, which is pretty cool. Sonic turns into Super Sonic, Beat graffiti tags everyone, Amy smacks people with her hammer, Bonanza Bros get to play like an entire mini-game while their All-Star is active. I think my favorite one though has to go to Amigo. He basically causes racers to form a conga line behind him, and he can just drive on ahead while they're all stuck dancing. I don't know why I enjoy it so much, it's just a funny visual. These are pretty effective items and do help contribute in distinguishing All-Stars Racing from any other kart racer, but you rarely ever get to see them if you're so far in the lead since, again, you basically need to be near or at dead last to use them, and only racers in or around those specific positions will feel the impact these All-Star moves present. It's definitely more balanced that way, but that just ends up making the All-Star move little more than a glorified comeback mechanic and nothing else. Alright, now it's time to talk about the racetracks themselves. I personally have a hard time describing what I consider to be truly great kart racing racetracks. Basically just give me fantastic set pieces, good difficulty, whether it be sharp turns or tons of hazards in the way, and variety with a good number of alternate paths and shortcuts to take. They don't all need to be like this, of course. Beginning tracks tend to have easier design than others, but these are the tracks I usually have the most fun with in my opinion. My main issue with All-Stars Racing's tracks is that none of them really fill any of these requirements. Thematically, there's a good variety across various SEGA franchises, Sonic obviously getting the spotlight, but you also have tracks from Billy Hatcher, Jet Set Radio, House of the Curian Mansion, Super Monkey Ball, Salmon Day Amigo, you name it. But the main problem I have with these tracks is that, like the game, they're far too basic and kind of boring. A lot of them are flat courses that consist of wide open roads with barely any obstacles at all. People are supposed to run into this? No sharp turns whatsoever, rarely any shortcuts worth anything. There's just nothing much to talk about here. The first Billy Hatcher stage has a grand total of a single incredibly easy shortcut to take, and none of the AI, even if they're set on expert mode, take it for Pete's sakes. The Sonic themed tracks do fare a little bit better in this area from my experience. Like, they're still not great, but they at least offer some interesting set pieces, some obstacles to dodge, and some semblances of shortcuts to take. There's just still not overall much going on here. Just a bunch of easy turning, and that's about it. It makes a lot of these courses just sort of blend together in a pile of SEGA-themed mush, and the ones that do stick out don't do it in a very enjoyable way. For example, in the Billy Hatcher Volcano stage, Billy Hatcher stage not being very good, I'm starting to sense a pattern here. There's a section where if you boost on the first ramp, whether by drifting or stunting or an item, you overshoot the second platform and end up crashing and slowing down. So you're basically encouraged to not boost if you don't want to overshoot the ramp and make it? Like, what kind of design is this? Not all of them are bad. I generally consider the Jet Set Radio tracks to be decent, and some of the Monkey Ball tracks aren't too bad, but it really feels like the longer you go on in these tracks, the worse it gets, all culminating into what I consider to be the worst design track in the entire game, Monkey Targets. It starts out kind of okay, if not fairly barren and plain, like, whoa, I drive up a ramp and get a bunch of airtime and I land right on the targets just like the games, this is so rad! But then afterwards you need to climb all the way back up the giant spiral staircase ramp at the end to do it all over again, and this is just awful. It's like the only point in the game where you need to slow down and brake drift, and it just comes off as jarring. It's not even hard to do, I can do it pretty consistently, but it just doesn't feel good to pull off. Certainly not satisfying due to the athlete's unsatisfying driving controls, and especially not multiple times in a row for 3 laps. You don't even have anything to look forward to after these sharp turns, just more empty straight shots. This track is a waste. On top of this, during races you can often get a lot of instances of being in the air for a while. Usually these sections are designed for you to pull off stunts, but because of how floaty these vehicles are, doubly so for the hovercraft vehicles, you just end up awkwardly being in the air for too long on multiple occasions. It just kind of breaks flow and again further cements the lack of weight and solid handling these vehicles have. Not really much of a complaint you could argue, but it just doesn't sit right with me, I don't know. Speaking of stunts, I need to go on a bit of a tangent to talk about the stunt system in this game because I do not think they did a good job designing the stunt system at all. So stunts you can perform anytime in the air with a push of a button. This isn't a one stunt only system like Mario Kart either, no, you can chain multiple stunts together by pressing the button multiple times in the air, which, you know, is fine enough. But the issue is that while stunting, your character will begin to perform a random predetermined animation, whether it be a car barrel rolling, jumping out and doing a little trick, or just slightly moving out of your vehicle for a split second. Your ability to end the stunt and perform another one entirely depends on whether or not the animation your character is currently playing ends. To put it in simple terms, the animation that plays when you perform a stunt is completely random, and you need to wait until it finishes to perform another one. And it ends up being random chance if you actually get any boost value off the stunt or not, because again, it's complete luck based. The animation of the stunt that's played could be way too long, and you could land while it's still playing because of it, and as a result, you fail the stunt and get no speed boost value out of sheer dumb luck. Oh, what's that? You want to get a speed boost off this ramp here? Well, I guess that's fine. Just kidding! Whoa! Hope your character pulls out a very quick animation and ends it before you land, otherwise you're screwed. Better luck next ramp! Again, I bring up Shadow being an unbalanced character, and the stunts are another factor as to why. Pretty much all of his stunt animations are extremely brief and quick, allowing you to pull off multiple in quick succession without the risk of landing while an animation is still playing. This character really is the whole package. So, to put it bluntly once more, you can be cheated out of getting a speed boost by doing stunts because you have absolutely no control over whether the random predetermined animation ends, as I said before. But in all honesty, it's not like there's any risk to failing stunts. When you screw up a stunt and land while the animation is still playing, you just continue driving as if nothing else happened. You don't spin out or slow down or anything, you just push onwards like you're resuming a peaceful Sunday afternoon drive. So while the stunt system is screwed over by random luck due to you not having any control over when animation plays and how long it is, you aren't really risking anything by performing stunts, considering there's not really any chance for genuine failure with how you aren't slowed down at all. Thus, this all contributes and combines to form an extremely lackluster, poorly designed stunt system that messes with the game's sense of flow during races in general. And considering the issue I pointed out previously of how you end up in the air for a long time repeatedly, the bad stunt system is something you're going to tend to notice a lot. To focus more on the mechanics a bit, the main gameplay element All-Stars Racing focuses on during races is drifting. Like Crash Team Racing before it, mastering drifting is the best way you can get speed and win races, and the game essentially encourages you to drift throughout the entire track at all times. I don't actually really mind the specific focus on drifting, especially because the drift itself feels nice to use, has a nice arc, and holding a drift to charge and gain additional boost levels feels great as well. The problem is that when you do this, the game's challenge just sort of disappears into nothingness. Considering how little of an impact items have and how track design can be really basic at times, and especially considering how it's not exactly that hard to master the game's rigid, simplistic mechanics compared to the other All-Stars racing games, or even other kart racers, constantly drifting and maintaining speed kinda makes this game a bit of a joke difficulty-wise. Even on expert difficulty, I was effortlessly getting first place on every Grand Prix race. I don't think they understood what this word means, call it a hunch. When you complete any race in any mode, whether it be single race or Grand Prix, you earn SEGA miles, basically points you can gain to use as currency. You use these miles in the shop to unlock things such as additional racers, music, and racetracks. Now while this system works, I honestly would have just preferred if we could unlock racers just from playing races, because to get everything you basically need to start grinding races for currency after a while. Alongside the standard single races, the game also has a mission mode, allowing you to complete various objectives with unique scenarios. Like each mission is contextualized with a little story blurb that's actually a detail I can appreciate. I thought I would end up having some degree of fun with this mode, but as soon as I started playing through them one by one, my enthusiasm disappeared faster than my self-esteem disappears whenever I start writing a new script for a video. Each mission has a relatively simple objective, whether it be winning simple races, staying ahead of an opponent for a specific amount of time, collecting items along the track, avoiding objects. There's arguably some good variety to be had, and you get graded based on how many stars you obtain, with the highest rank you can get being a AAA ranking. Now, knowing what I think of the game thus far, only a clinically insane person would push themselves to not only beat all 64 missions offered in mission mode, but to also complete all of them with a AAA rate. What am I doing with my life? So, yeah, I'm a madman and decided to beat all missions in mission mode and obtain the highest possible ranking on all of them. And I can tell you right now, this was a mistake. I don't know, you can definitely make an argument that I was already burned out by the game at this state, so that's why this lingering distaste for the missions strengthened, but these missions are just a whole lot of nothing. I said before there's variety, but considering there's 64 freaking missions, that variety starts to wear thin very quickly and starts to get repeated a lot. There are some missions that are just use the all-star move to hit these many racers, and in the case with the Bonanza Brothers mission, you basically literally do nothing but mash the A button and win. This game also has boss fights, surprisingly, if you can believe it, and oh my god, are they terrible. I can kinda give brownie points for the idea, but these were just not fun at all. You drive around looking for item capsules, use the item to get a cheap pot shot on the boss, and then drive away and look for another item box, rinse and repeat until the boss dies. Oftentimes, the game gives you items that you can't even shoot at the boss, like the traffic cone mines. When you get these, you can only guess where the boss is going to wander to next in the cramped arena he's in, place one there, and hope and pray the boss is dumb enough to walk into it. Oh right, you also can't even so much as graze the boss, or any other stage hazard either, as one single hit will completely deny a AAA rating. It's not necessarily hard, but it's far too monotonous and luck-based to be anywhere near fun. I'm just glad there's only 2 of them in the entire game. So yeah, while the mission mode is a novel idea, the missions themselves are draining, both with the content they present and with the sheer amount of them you're able to complete. The game also has time trials as expected, where you can race against ghost opponents for the fastest time. Oh yeah, here we go. Gonna burn rubber and do my best to beat these super challenging ghost Oh. That was the dev time I just beat. Oh dear. The main point I'm trying to make here isn't to try and humble brag and flex my epic gamer skills here. My point is to highlight that between the bland items, uninteresting mechanics, awful stunt systems, simplistic barren track design, absence of difficulty, and extremely lackluster single-player only offerings, this game just gets really boring after a while. And again, look, I understand that it was the first in the series, and with that, Sumo Digital clearly wanted to just test the waters and see what worked and what didn't. I get it, I really do. But even with that aside, it's just really hard to go back to this game. If I'm going to play any of the All-Stars Racing franchise, it's going to be the other 2 for good reasons, which I'll get into later with this retrospective. Okay, look, I know I just spent a lot of time hardcore dunking on this game, but I want to emphasize that this isn't a terrible game at all, far from it. I don't hate it, I just think it's mediocre, below average in terms of gameplay and design perspectives. But even with these issues I have, I still think the game has a lot of positive aspects going for it. The presentation is colorful and vibrant, though the blank expressionless character models are more than a bit off-putting. The tracks are jam-packed with detail, the roster is extremely varied as I mentioned before, and hey, this might seem like a low bar, but I'm at the very least glad they're incorporating a large variety of all these different SEGA franchises considering how dormant most of them were at that time. They did a great job representing each franchise with the vibrant, detailed racetracks. You can tell there was a lot of care put into this entire game in terms of representation. Admittedly, the Sonic racetracks are far too geared towards Sonic Heroes instead of representing a ton of the other areas in the Sonic franchise, but Sonic Heroes is base, so we'll let it slide. The music is varied, albeit they're just direct rips from the original games with no changes added with the exception of the main menu theme. Wasn't I supposed to be pointing out the positive aspects of this game again? But being able to select which song plays during each track depending on how many you purchase from the shop adds a different fun vibe to these races each time. Bonus points for including a lot of Sonic Rush music. Any inclusion of Sonic Rush music is an instant win for me. I also want to point out the in-game announcers. They constantly provide commentary over races like you would hear during actual professional live races on TV. At least I think so. I don't know. I don't watch NASCAR. I prefer to enjoy life here. Anyway, they're honestly kinda hilarious with the dialogue they provide.
A big hello from Casino Park. We've got a full house of racers ready to risk it all here today. This casino's crammed with tricky turns. Our racers need to ramp up those skills to 11. Well, isn't this a quiet? Wake me up when you guys start driving for real, huh? Come on, guys. Surely one of you wants to win. So into the second lap we go as this race is hot. Choo-choo's looking almost as worried as the rest of the racers with that.
I've seen a lot of people give this game props for the amount of charm, and like, yeah, I can see the charm the game has on full display. But it's just not enough to fully salvage an otherwise mediocre game. At the end of the day, All-Stars Racing just ends up being a boring, run-of-the-mill, super basic kart racer with not much room to truly stand out on its own. I know it has fans, but I'm certainly not one of them. I can't see myself revisiting this one anytime soon. Now, of course, despite all of the griping I just displayed front and center, the game still ended up being a moderate success in terms of critical reception and sales, so it makes sense that Sumo went right back to work on crafting a sequel. The development staff of the game this time included members of Bizarre Creations, who developed the Project Gotham Racing series, among other things. I'm personally not really familiar with the series, but hey, at least we're getting people who once again know their stuff, right? Wanted to mention this real quick because I wasn't sure if this was in the first game or the second, but apparently Bayonetta was supposed to be a playable racer, but was allegedly cut due to the devs fearing she would raise the ESRB rating. Which is baloney. She ended up being a DLC fighter and a returning fighter in 2 Smash Brothers games, and she didn't raise the ESRB rating at all, so this excuse is garbage. She was robbed, I tell you, she was robbed! On April 30th, 2012, a reveal trailer dropped showcasing the title of the upcoming sequel to All-Stars Racing and the main new mechanic it showed. Later releasing to the US on December 11th, is what we now know as Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed.
Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed!
Hey, I just said. This one I also remember playing as a kid. Got the game for my Wii U, and once again, I still own a copy of the game. It was one of the many titles I bought for the system near its launch period. There. Maybe one day I'll get to make a video about you. Rest well for now, King. All the footage you'll see, of course, is from the PC version, and this will apply to Team Sonic Racing as well. Feel I should get this out of the way first and foremost. To say that Transformed completely and utterly trounces the first All-Stars Racing game in every single conceivable category would be the biggest understatement of the century. Yeah, this game? This is the real deal for me. This is bar none the best kart racer I think I have ever played. Mario Kart? Nah. Crash Team Racing? Get that out of here. This game is where it's at. Remember a while ago when I said that the last game was a good excuse for Sumo Digital to test the waters and see where they could go from there? Well, I guess they took that advice literally, because... So as the title infers, the main selling point that this game has to offer is the transformation mechanic. During races, your car will transform into one of 2 different other vehicle types, a speedboat or a plane, to adapt to the environment. You transform by simply entering these transforming rings placed throughout the course. Transforming vehicles as a concept for a kart racer has technically been done before in games like Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Kart 7, but I feel Transformed figure out a way to truly make this concept more mechanically engaging in more ways than one. Each transformation has specific quirks you can take advantage of. Cars are obviously the all-around type of vehicle, planes are by far the fastest of the 3 and have access to a technique known as risk boosting, which I'll get to later. The speedboats are usually slower than the other vehicles, but are also more bouncy in how they handle, especially with the waves that constantly show up, allowing you to get major airtime and sneak in stunts to get a ton of speed. Combine this with the fact that the speed cap apparently doesn't apply to the boosts on the water, and you can actually gain some pretty tremendous speed if you time everything perfectly. Despite their differences, each of these different forms still handle relatively similar to the car, so it's at least easier to understand and delve into the transformations when you first pick up the game. The transformation mechanic also allows for some of the best track design I've ever seen in a kart racer. You'll start to see the layout of the tracks change throughout the course of a lap. It's usually never the same experience for each lap, it's incredibly dynamic. For example, for 2 laps you could be driving down long stretches of road and then all of a sudden, boom, the road ends up being destroyed, forcing you to fly above it in plane form. Or you could be driving down a track where the area is constantly flooding, leading to higher water levels each lap, leading to different track design for both car and speedboat. Things constantly remain interesting in Transform. No track ever gets stale for too long, and it's one of the many things I love about it. And of course, while we're on the topic of track design, sweet mercy, what a complete 180. These are some fantastic racetracks. They basically tick all the boxes of what I'm looking for. Fun, hidden, challenging shortcuts, sharp turns aplenty that combine with the transformation mechanic. In all honesty, I don't think I can find a single track or cup in this entire game that I can find bad or even below average. They're all genuinely fantastic. Maybe I can rag on the Classic Cup for a bit. It's basically a collection of 4 tracks from the original All-Stars Racing, so, you know, they aren't exactly great. But to be fair, they are some of the better tracks All-Stars Racing had, and they're made that much more engaging due to the additional mechanics Transform possesses. Speaking of which, track design isn't the only thing that Transformed improves upon in all fronts from the first game. The general mechanics also got a huge upgrade as well, and this isn't just talking about the transforming vehicles either. To start, the vehicles are far less floaty and have a much greater sense of weight to them. The game's pace is much faster than the first. Boosts are more impactful, so overall you get a greater sense of speed. The handling right out the gate feels like a proper full-fledged upgrade on all fronts, and the controls in general are rock solid. You can now continuously hold your drift for as long as you want, releasing it when you're either able to or you found an opportune point to do so. Quickly letting go of the drift button, swapping directions, and holding drift again will allow you to change directions and still maintain your drift, which feels immeasurably satisfying to pull off. It can also allow for one to theoretically charge boost all throughout the entire race over and over again if they become MLG pro at maneuvering through the course, always drifting. The stunt system got a major overhaul, and I honestly think this is the best stunt system a kart racer has to offer. Rather than an unintuitively sluggish mid-air pose that is entirely determined by random chance animations, transform stunts are intuitive and extremely fun to pull off. Using the right control stick, you can flip your vehicle forwards, backwards, or barrel roll left and right. These moves are shared across the entire cast and are all the exact same speed, no random animation nonsense, just pure consistency. Thank you. The goal is to pull off as many stunts as you can before hitting the ground, which adds a great risk and reward factor as stunts are fast and easy to pull off. But if you fail a stunt, you slow down dramatically, an actual risk, unlike All-Stars Racing stunts. What's that? Are you tired of me ragging on All-Stars Racing too much? Too bad, I'm gonna keep doing it. The boost you receive by doing stunts all depends on how many you pull off before hitting the ground, though doing 3 completely different stunts nets you a higher boost than doing the same stunts in a row repeatedly. The best part of this whole thing, however, is that you can pull off stunts basically anywhere you want. As long as you're in the air and you think you could get away with it, you can perform stunts at any time and potentially get boost value off of every opportunity that you're airborne. This is especially effective with the boats like I mentioned earlier. The removal of boost speed cap combined with the airtime you get with the giant waves means you can gain a surprising amount of speed for a vehicle that's supposedly slower than the other two forms. The stunts aren't just good for gaining speed either, they're multi-purpose by design. You can use them for maneuverability in the air, a good chance to reposition in a more favorable spot when you land, and the ability to dodge incoming items thrown your way. And of course, yeah, we have to talk about risk boosting.
Risk boost.
In plane form, if you dodge an obstacle, which can be literally any part of the stage geometry, at the last possible second before you hit it, you'll get a risk boost. Essentially a slight boost in speed for that split-second dodge. Once again, this introduces another incredibly fun risk and reward system, though this one is obviously way harder to pull off consistently. But if you do manage to pull off risk boosting off the stage terrain over and over and over again, you can get an insane amount of speed and it is gratifying to pull off. This isn't even all you can pull off with stunts either. You can pull off some ridiculous stuff by stunting in a very specific angle at the corner of transform rings during plane form and go flying and leap over huge distances. I mean, just look at this nonsense, god dang. This is also honestly why I prefer Transformed over something like, say, Sonic Riders, because not only is Transformed easier to understand and get into and is therefore more inviting of a game right out of the gate, but it also offers just as much mechanical depth and complexity if you take the time to look into it. It's the best of both worlds. It makes Transform that much more fun to play in comparison, in addition to the insane track design and large amount of SEGA fan service in general. It also helps that on top of the character roster being much more balanced than the previous game, you also get access to mods via leveling up your character. This adds an extra layer of customization so you can adjust a certain racer's playstyle to something you're more comfortable with. Whether it's more speed, better handling, better acceleration, a more balanced playstyle, etc. Next up are items that you pick up during race, which have almost all received a major overhaul for the best across the board. Not only are they far more impactful compared to the dinky Mario Kart copycat items in the first All-Stars game, they're also more interesting by design. The two projectile items, Firework and Ice, are super fast and far-reaching and thus require more precision to aim and hit opponents with them. They also have different properties to set them apart. The Firework can ricochet off walls but is a single-use item. Ice doesn't ricochet off walls but comes in packs of 3, and hitting all 3 on an opponent slows them down significantly. There's the Glove, acting as a replacement to the shield but can catch items and then be used to throw them back at opponents, or alternatively, it can be used to block a stage hazard should you happen to run into it, which is also pretty handy. There's the Hot Rod, giving you a massive speed boost and providing another risk and reward mechanic depending on when you can time the ending shockwave attack. Heck, even the items that seem more disruptive than others are pretty balanced. The drone is one of the only instances of a homing item in the entire game, but you can actually avoid it with a well-timed boost at just the right moment. Swarm is the closest I can think of to this game getting a blue shell equivalent item, but you can still maneuver around it with skillful driving or by attacking it with items. Atop of this, there are also yellow item boxes scattered throughout the course known as super pickups. They could be an upgraded version of a regular item such as the super glove, or they could give you multiple amounts of the same item. These are usually placed in hard to reach areas or tight corners and shortcuts, encouraging skillful driving and course memorization to consistently pick up. The point I'm trying to get across is that these items are not only better designed and more impactful, but they're also just plain fun to use and further add to the chaotic, frantic nature and fast pace of Transformed. Unrelated, sort of, I guess, but I don't know where else to put this. There are also these coins you can collect on these tracks, but all they do is allow you to spend them on slot machines before a race starts in order to get some sort of random advantage. Not really super interesting, but it's there, I guess. If I did have to gripe about anything related to the items, it would be two things. One, the issue of these items not being a part of the different SEGA universes and still feeling and looking like generic, wacky cartoon items is still a minor gripe I had from the first All-Stars racing game, and yeah, it's still not addressed here. I mean, come on, it's even easier to reimagine them in the first game. Swarm is just begging to become Buzz Bombers. I mean, heck, the Blowfish item was changed into a garbage Puyo from the Puyo Puyo series in the Japanese version of Transform, but why couldn't the rest of the items be changed to something like that? Stuff like that is fun and injects fanservice into an already fanservice-filled game. Another issue I have, and I realize I'm not exactly alone on this particular issue either, is the complete downgrade of the All-Star move. Wow, the first All-Stars game managed to do something better than Transform. Color me surprised, I guess. Better chalk that one up for All-Stars Racing then, it's certainly climbing up the ranks now. Instead of every character having a fun and unique All-Star move, now everything is a lot more streamlined and sterile. Your vehicle transforms into plane form regardless of what terrain you're on, and you can either lob homing projectiles or shoot shockwave attacks. Yeah, that's about it. No supersonic, no samba conga. Every racer feels practically identical in this regard. It's super lame in comparison to the creative and unique variety the first game had. While we're on the subject of things I don't particularly like about Transform, figure I could get this topic over and done with quickly since it's not especially very lengthy as you can imagine. Let's talk about the character roster. Now look, I get it. Everyone has the hots for Danica Patrick, I understand, but I also have to ask, was she like really deserving to be part of the roster? It just feels like product placement. I mean, it literally is. Both her, Team Fortress, and Wreck-It Ralph feel like such weird, nonsensical third-party inclusions that just kind of clash with the rest of the roster, and not in a good way as guest characters typically do. I will say though that the voice of Ralph in the game actually does a remarkably good job at imitating John C. Reilly, so props to him. On top of that, they've made some very unfortunate cuts to the base roster. Opa Opa, Bonanza Brothers, Zobio, and Zopiko are all gone. Even Billy Hatcher, for some bizarre reason, is cut too. He has a single track in this game, but Billy himself is nowhere to be seen. It's so odd. Apparently this is because they couldn't figure out a way to rework his vehicle into multiple transforming vehicle forms, which, I don't know, man. I thought that part was pretty straightforward for as straightforward as his car already was. This cut just feels unnecessary. In addition to this, the roster is also packed with clone characters. I mean, they make sense, don't get me wrong. Gum, Mimi, and Rial are obvious additions to model and include after their respective counterparts, but like, Pudding? I think we could have done without a few of them. Not all the new additions are bad though, and speaking of Riala, they finally made Knights a playable racer, which is pretty cool. Okay. Oh dear. Okay, so Knights, instead of riding in a car, just decided to become the car, and do the Knights characters just do this sort of thing in the games, and I'm just an uncultured peasant who doesn't know what I'm talking about because I haven't played the games yet? Hang on, let me just... Oh hey, they do this sort of thing, what do you know? In any case, this inevitably led to Rystar being the flag bearer. Look, some poor Sega sap is going to be the flag bearer in these crossover games no matter what. It's likely going to be Rystar who'll take the bullet every single time. Or heck, actually get Omochao to be the flag bearer instead. That way they don't need to exclude anyone. What was I saying again? Alright. Besides Knights, there's also Gilius Thunderhead from Golden Axe, Vice from Skies of Arcadia, Joe Musashi from Shinobi, and of course, who could forget Aegis, the car from Daytona, USA that transforms into an afterburner fighter jet, who then also transforms into a Sega Dreamcast controller. Absolutely incredible. Man, you're telling me these things were actually water and magma resistant? Dreamcast developers really were ahead of their time. And I don't care what anyone says, Football Manager is an amazing roster pick. Just goes to show that SEGA can pull a rep from any part of the library that they so desire and get away with it, and hey, I'm 100% on board with that decision. Now all they need is to bring Echo the Dolphin to the next one and we're all set. Alright, gonna create a bit of an off-script interjection here. This is Future G7 reporting in. You know, just as I was recording and editing this video, I actually was recording some more footage for All Stars Racing Transformed, you know, more B-roll footage to use in general gameplay and primarily specific examples of using items to go along with the audio that I've been talking about. But one detail that I just now caught, like I've never actually paid attention to this before, is with Aegis, and in boat form, in his Dreamcast controller form, it turns out that if you hit corners, if you like run into stuff, if you spin out, Aegis actually makes Dreamcast console noises. Like, you know, if you've ever owned a Dreamcast, when you hear it like reading a disc or doing anything really, it's like the loudest console noises known to man. And they actually managed to sneak that into his boat form. That is genuinely hilarious. That's how you know how much, fan service and love was put into Transform. There's details that I'm still to this day figuring out or noticing for the first time. That's pretty amazing. I feel I should bring up comparisons of the single-player modes as well. The World Tour mode is the main single-player campaign offering and is light years better than the mission mode in the first All-Stars game. Okay, I mean, it is basically a glorified mission mode, but the entire experience is far more substantial. You earn stars based on the difficulty you choose when selecting the mission. The harder the difficulty you choose, the more stars you earn. You can then actually use these stars you've collected to unlock extra racetracks and characters, encouraging improving your skill and getting better at the game in order to earn more stars. There's also a lot more variety compared to previously. You have your standard Grand Prix and single races, but you also have the addition of elimination races, drift challenges, ring challenges, traffic challenges where you need to avoid and weave through cars in order to keep the timer going, rival races. You even face off against big freaking tanks, which actually feels like they finally took the boss fight idea from the previous All-Stars game and got it right. At some point you unlock Expert difficulty, the hardest difficulty setting, but this also means an extra star to unlock for every single mission, both upcoming and previously. This is also kind of a big complaint I have for World Tours. Essentially, if you want to get all the stars that the mode has to offer, you basically need to replay a ton of the missions all over again. I don't know, I feel like this could have been handled better, but I think Expert mode should have been there from the start, and let players evaluate how they want to start tackling these missions right off the bat. But hey, unlike last time, I have to say the harder difficulty settings are like actually genuinely hard and provide a satisfying challenge.
Event failed.
You'll be hearing from me again.
Was that a threat? And yes, I did end up getting every single star in World Tour mode, so I basically unlocked all courses and characters. For some reason, Eggman was the one you unlocked by collecting every single star. That seems kind of like a steep task to complete to unlock such an iconic part of the roster, but whatever, I don't really mind it, I guess. Time Attack mode also returns, and Lord have mercy, the Expert Ghosts are ruthless this time around. They're basically the dev times again, and man, you really need to master stuff like risk boosting if you want to get an edge over these times. It's pretty absurd. Not that I'm against this, of course. This is basically what I expect over actual dev times. Transformed even offers online races. This is technically something that the first All-Stars game also had, but for some reason I will never understand the PC version of All-Stars Racing removed this feature. It's only on the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions. It's also apparently on the Wii version as well. Oh, wait. Granted, I only played a few matches, and while my connection was perfectly fine, and this is coming from someone who's basically stuck being forced to have McDonald's Wi-Fi attached to our house in the dead middle of Texas, but the people who do play this game online are clearly the ones who sink hundreds of hours into this game, so you'd better be prepared if you're still willing to play online on PC. Presentation-wise, man, this game looks stellar. The color palette is more vibrant, the level of detail far surpasses what the first game had, the character models are a lot better than the blank, soulless husks of the first game, they can actually express emotions well. Okay, maybe a little too well. And seriously, man, a lot of these stages are truly breathtaking. The Transform devs did such a remarkable job capturing the feel of the original games that apparently they made the producer of Skies of Arcadia almost cry when she saw Rogue's Landing track. That's how you know how much effort they put into the presentation. The soundtrack is also outstanding. The first game had nothing but straight ports of the original music, which, you know, was perfectly fine, to be fair, nothing wrong with that. And it also helped that you could choose which song was played on a specific course, but this game is chock full of fantastic remixes of all sorts of SEGA tracks, the Burning Rangers theme being probably among one of my favorites. All of these remixes were possible thanks to well-known composer and giant self-absorbed temper tantrum-throwing man-child Richard Jacques. My personal thoughts on him as an individual aside, and believe me, I would like to go into detail on why he's a terrible person and why it's baffling that SEGA still apparently keeps working with him, that's beside the point. The soundtrack as a whole is a great listen all around. Even the main theme got a remix, which is pretty cool. My personal favorites being the Burning Depths remix, but there's also plenty of SEGA franchises that got great remixes. Carrier Zone has a pretty rad rendition of Afterburner as well, and hey, any inclusion of Toot Toot Sonic Warrior gets a winning grade in my book. It's not Sonic Boom, but you know, it's pretty good. I feel like there's still a lot more I could say to describe the genius design of Transform and how the team at Sumo absolutely knocked it out of the park in pretty much every way you can possibly think of. The mechanics are the best I've seen in a kart racer, the track design is super dynamic, creative, and overall fantastic. The difficulty is quite challenging but never overly frustrating. It's content-packed, it runs smooth as butter, and looks amazing. Honestly, it's hard to just nitpick and come up with issues I do have with the game. This is still the best kart racer I have ever played, no contest. And going back to revisit it only reinforced these thoughts. To nobody's surprise, as I stated prior, it blows the original game away in every single way imaginable. I mean, just man, I love this game a lot. I hope someday Sumo makes another All-Stars game on the same level as this game, or better yet, makes one that surpasses it. I suppose saying this out loud kind of spoils my thoughts on the next game in this supposed trilogy, so let's dive into that, shall we? So once again, like the last game, Transformed ended up being a decent critical and financial success. Another title in this sub-series seemed inevitable, but honestly, how could Sumo possibly follow up on something as mechanically rich and interesting as Transformed? Going into the game's development, this is something I can actually remember seeing unfold myself, as I was online savvy actively looking into the development of new titles coming out at the time. Back in 2018 at the South by Southwest Sonic panel, a teaser went up announcing a new racing title, the letter R being highlighted with the rest of the game's title left shrouded in darkness. That letter highlight made many speculate it had something to do with Sonic R of all games. I personally saw it for what it was, a cute reference, and yeah, that's pretty much all it ended up being, nothing more. Later, this title was fully revealed in May 2018, causing quite a bit of confusion. Just Sonic characters, huh? No SEGA crossover this time. I was a bit put off by the news, but I guess it made sense considering how popular and recognizable Sonic is, and the fact that I'm a huge Sonic fan anyway, means that these SEGA character subtractions weren't this huge, detrimental blow to my excitement for the game. Looking at the development history is interesting because a majority of the people who worked on this game didn't have any experience with the previous All-Stars titles. They're newbies. Steve Lycett, executive producer that worked on the first two games, wasn't involved with this game either. That's not a great sign, now is it? However, to not turn this into a Sonic Forces situation, the developers did have contact with the devs who previously worked on the first two All-Stars games for advice, so that's somewhat of a relief, I suppose. Later on, in May 21st, 2019, we finally received what would be now known as Team Sonic Racing.
Team Sonic Racing!
I'm beginning to sense a pattern here. The first part of that title isn't just for show though. For the first time I think, in any kart racer I can think of, teamwork is a huge mechanic and selling point. The main premise is that you race in a team of 3 and work together to achieve victory at the finish line. Apparently Iizuka himself came up with the idea when he was watching his son play a kart racing game against other people, and thought of how he could create a game where they could all play together cooperatively. Aww. Aw, that's actually really wholesome. Oh, keep being based, Iizuka. Sonic Heroes seems like an obvious basis for inspiration considering the emphasis on teamwork and working in squads of 3, but the developers also took inspiration from a number of multiplayer games such as Splatoon and Overwatch. A kart racer focused solely on team play and cooperation is something I don't think I've ever seen attempted in any kart racer ever the more I think about it. It's a very unique concept that could have the potential to be a lot of fun. Of course, the promotion for this game was kind of underwhelming, as they rarely, if ever, showcased gameplay footage, opting instead to showcase the game's soundtrack. And I mean, to be fair, it's not a bad thing to showcase at all, especially when the music is this good. Like, SEGA just went ahead and pulled out all the stops with this soundtrack for no reason. T-Lopes, Junsen Oe, Tomoyo Otani, Crush 40, Hyper Potions, they really didn't pull their punches when it came to the soundtrack, and it definitely shows. This is by far my favorite soundtrack of all three All-Stars games, and honestly, it's up there for one of my favorite Sonic soundtracks of all time, in general. The main theme, Green Light Ride, is earworm central, and I could seriously listen to that song over and over again, especially the remix in the garage. Now that is some good music right there. Now imagine if they could get Hideki Naganuma to participate in the next one, and we might have the true resemblance of gaming soundtrack perfection. But I'm getting somewhat off topic here. Like I said, despite the soundtrack being amazing, that's kind of all they ever promoted. We did eventually get a single IDW comic tie-in and a couple of animated shorts with Team Sonic Racing Overdrive, and now these were pretty awesome. But only occasionally did they showcase gameplay or new features. The game was also supposed to come out late 2018, but was delayed into May 21st, 2019 for added polish, and we'll get to that, don't worry. So, despite myself not really knowing a whole lot of the new features being added, I was still fairly optimistic this was going to be a good product, especially considering Sumo's previous track record with the All-Stars titles. Personally, my bigger question would be, how would this game compare to Transformed? Because Transformed already set the bar so astronomically high for what an engaging kart racer could be, in my opinion. That begs another question then. Would Team Sonic Racing end up being a worthy follow-up to Transformed, or at the very least still be a great kart racer in its own right?
The answer is yes and no.
Okay, well, to get this out of the way first and foremost, yes, Team Sonic Racing is a good game, great even. But the experience feels lacking in a lot of key areas, and unfortunately it is ultimately a step back from Transformed in many different aspects. The continuous drift and stunt system from Transformed makes a triumphant return, but it feels off. It's still a lot of fun, but it doesn't feel as tight. Boosts feel less impactful. The game overall feels slower. The handling, while solid, doesn't feel as solid. Like, what I'm trying to get at is that the general feeling of driving around and whatnot still feels good to do, but it's just not as good as Transformed. It's not where I think it should be. And since the vehicles no longer transform mid-race, and consequently the course design doesn't change to reflect that element either, it also ends up being not as exciting as a result. While it may just seem like I'm bashing the game right out of the gate for not being transformed, the handling and sense of speed overall still feels fine enough to be enjoyable, and the main hook of Team Sonic Racing is what truly makes it stand out all on its own, the team mechanic. Essentially, as mentioned previously, you race in a squad of 3, and the main premise is to use teamwork to help each other out throughout the race so that all of you can score the highest. Yeah, it doesn't really matter if you achieve first place. If your teammates consistently place lower than you, you can end up losing at the end. It's a very unique spin on the standard kart racer formula, and one that I feel works pretty well. Basically, when you work together, you can perform a variety of team actions. One example is a slipstream. If you're in the lead of your squad, for instance, you leave behind a yellow trail, and anyone who stays in it for a bit and leaves will receive a speed boost, otherwise known as a slingshot. One of my personal favorites in this game is the skim boost. If you spin out and immediately lose speed, either because you were hit by an item or you steered off course or into a wall, happens to the best of us, don't worry. If a teammate is going faster and moves past you while being in close proximity, you immediately get a huge speed boost to get back into the race. You can also do this to a teammate that's wiped out as well. It's a very fun way to somewhat counteract item shenanigans. It keeps the pace going and is immensely satisfying to pull off. Finally, there's item transferring. It's as simple as it sounds. You transfer items you don't need to teammates who do, or you can request items if you don't have any. Say you're in the lead and you have an item that doesn't really benefit your current position, like a projectile weapon, you can now discard that weapon and give it to a teammate who can better utilize it. And of course, taking out rival characters also counts as a team action, but that's self-explanatory, I suppose. Doing all of these team actions charge up your Team Ultimate meter, which, when activated, basically gives you a super boost, charging through the track at an incredibly high speed, ignoring terrain, hazards, and can wipe out opponents that collide with it. The catch is, the duration of this ultimate ability lasts longer when all 3 of you activate the ability at the same time, requiring some coordination. But really, if you want to do well in Team Sonic Racing, everything requires coordination. They weren't kidding when they said that this racer is all about teamwork. Working together is the best way to win races, assuming you're playing with friends or locals. With computer allies, it's not really feasible to practice coordination considering you're playing with literal robots, but honestly it is still possible to try and help your allies out with skim boost, item transferring, and slipstream, so the team mechanic is still pretty fun to use regardless. The one lone exception to this is the team ultimate meter, basically because every teammate needs to press the button and activate it at the same time in order to make the ability last longer, and it's kinda hard to do that when you have bots as teammates. I mean, I assume they all press it automatically when I activate it, but I'll never know for certain. It's the biggest flaw I found when playing solo. The characters you pick are also separated into different classes, so to speak, a speed type, power type, and technique type. Speed types get the highest top speed, as you would expect. It can even perform a radial burst, which disrupts incoming projectiles if you have a level 2 boost or higher, but they have the worst acceleration and poor defense to attacks overall. Technique characters can drive on any terrain and because of that are able to take shortcuts more often than most other classes can't, and can also magnetically attract rings. Power characters can smash through track hazards no problem and don't spin out when hit by an item, but have the lowest speed and worst handling out of the three classes. Normally, these class types wouldn't be too exciting, kind of why I also don't really care about the class systems and riders much, but with the whole emphasis on team play, this opens up some really fun, interesting dynamics. To give a couple of examples real quick, a power character could intentionally take the lead of your squad to mow down stage hazards that block shortcuts, such as the one path in Frozen Junkyard for instance, allowing your team to take an early advantage. Or, you could intentionally have a technique character use this ability to cut corners to increase slipstream uptime. There's all these interesting micro-interactions that make Team Sonic Racing more engaging. Despite the overall driving and mechanics being a step down from Transformed, the team mechanic is fun and unique enough to stand out on its own to still make races engaging. The character selection I find to be a mixed bag overall. Insert obligatory complaint about Zavok here. Ignoring the whole it's only Sonic characters deal, I honestly don't have a problem with who gets in and who doesn't, but as many have pointed out, the pairings are a bit weird. Team Sonic and Dart makes sense, but why are Chao solo driving with Team Rose and not Cream the Rabbit? It's because she's too young to get a driver's license or something? Or how about Vector team up with Silver and Blaze for some reason? Espio and Charmy are mentioned in this game, but Team Chaotix isn't actually a team you can have, which is a pretty big missed opportunity, I feel. To take a brief detour and talk about the items real quick, they've sort of regressed back to the first All-Stars game, and they're used more as traditional Mario Kart-esque items, only now the items are wisps. While many can complain about the wisp reappearing in a game when they don't need to which I argue Planet Wisp is one of the zones you race through, so of course the lists are going to be in this game, I'd also go as far to say that they've finally achieved the whole weapons now reflect the series they're based in point that I've been complaining about for a while because, you know, they're wisps from colors. It just makes a lot more sense. There are some wisp weapons that are more unique, like Laser just shoots a giant laser forward, Spikes rams into other cars and causes them to spin out, and Burst leaves a burning trail behind you, but the rest of them just kind of feel like recycled Mario Kart items again. Rhythm is Blooper, Drill is the Bullet Bill, Lightning is, well, lightning. They even introduced a brand new wisp in this game, the Jade Ghost Wisp, only for it to basically function exactly like Booze, where you phase through other racers and steal their items. Quake, on the other hand, functions similar to the Swarm item from Transformed, except it's 1,000 times worse in every single way. In Transformed, Swarm seemed intimidating, but you could always maneuver around the Swarm no matter what situation you were in if you were skilled enough. With Quake, the stone pillars are way too close to each other, meaning unless you have an item or you're just stupidly lucky, you're going to get hit every single time. It's not very well designed at all. On a different topic, the track design is unfortunately somewhat of a low point, though not entirely, for a couple of reasons. The main reason being that like 50%, actually roughly 42% because math, of Team Sonic Racing's tracks are ripped straight from the first two All-Stars games, most of them being from the first. 8 are from All-Stars Racing, 1 is from Transform, just with the boat section removed. I said before that I'm not really a fan of the barren track design in the first All-Stars game. It's far too basic and empty for my liking. You've already heard me complain about it before, but thankfully I think the team mechanic makes these tracks a bit more interesting to traverse through with all the multitasking you need to perform while racing. Good way to keep the brain engaged. As for the brand new tracks created just for Team Sonic Racing, honestly I gotta say they're pretty great. They're not transform levels of crazy, of course, but the design is solid overall. There's a lot of cool shortcuts to take, there's of course some obstacles to dodge, though I think there are still a couple of odd instances of design. Take Sky Road for example, where you get launched into the air at the beginning of the stage for a good chunk of time, but since you only get a maximum of 3 stunt boosts while in the air, you just end up with a ton of unnecessary airtime. Just that one instance I find weird, and it's arguably not even that much of a complaint, but in general, the new tracks are very solid overall. Thematically, they're what you've come to expect, pulled from a variety of locations Sonic has been through over the years. Each location has 3 tracks per zone, so it's a pretty neat reference to the traditional zone and act structure Sonic is known for. Seaside Hill is back, as is Casino Park and Final Fortress, but there are also brand new environments. Sandopolis from Sonic 3 and a bit of SA1 and 2 thrown in as well. Glacierland, inspired by a mix of Unleashed and Forces, Rooftop Run from Unleashed, Planet Wisp from Colors. The new environments are cool to see, and there are actually a lot of cool set pieces in these tracks that stand out. Like in Planet Wisp, you occasionally race by the Mother Wisp from the DS version of Sonic Colors, or how in Sandopolis you encounter King Boom Boo from SA2. Unfortunately though, there just isn't much new to go around, and that's my biggest issue. In total, there are only around 21 tracks to play, and after a while you start to see a lot of recycling of the same repeated tracks over and over again. And this is especially true in the campaign, it gets pretty repetitive after a while. Speaking of campaign, Team Sonic Racing features a full-on story mode unlike the previous 2 All-Stars games, though honestly it's really nothing spectacular, and that's putting it lightly. The cutscenes are presented in a fashion similar to Sonic Rivals of all games, full-on voice acting with still character portraits changing every now and then to convey a different expression. It's a somewhat cheap, low-effort way of presenting a story, but honestly, it's a racing game. I'm not going to expect much from the plot, and that's including the presentation. Basically, the main gist of the story is that this Tanuki known as the Donpa invited Sonic and his friends to test out his supercars, and the winner of the Grand Prix being able to keep their supercars. Many are suspicious of the Donpa, as his mannerisms and motives are vague and fairly mysterious, while Sonic really just doesn't care and wants to race and have a good time. Most everyone suspects that the Donpa is secretly working for Eggman. Until eventually Eggman just appears out of nowhere, and then the plot shifts to another Eggman did a bad and Sonic and Co has to go stop him deal. Turns out Dodonpa wasn't working for Eggman after all, and just really liked making good cars. The end. Nothing much happens here at all. Again, I wasn't expecting much of anything out of the story, but my word is it uneventful. The acting is decent, with one exception. I don't really like Knuckles' new voice. I understand Travis couldn't reprise his role as he had family to take care of, and I don't know if it was just the direction that was the issue, but oftentimes he just sounds like a dopey surfer dude, bro. Maybe he'll improve over time, but I'll have to wait and see on that front if he voices Knuckles for the next mainline Sonic title. The characterization overall is whatever. Not great, but like, it's a story on a kart racer. Again, not really expecting any high quality material here. Though for some reason what irks me is what they did to Zavok. In Lost World, he despised Eggman, genuinely couldn't stand him, and throughout the story he was depicted as this commanding, manipulative tyrant. Here he's just a dopey Eggman pawn, willingly obeying him for no good reason, even taking insults to the face with almost no reaction. It could be explained if, like, Eggman got his hands on another magic conch shell, but they didn't do that. Zavok gets weirdly mischaracterized here, and Good lord, you see what you're making me do here, Team Sonic Racing? You're making me complain that Zavok's characterization has been watered down compared to previously. Zavok of all characters, you're making me complain about how Zavok has been done bad. I feel like I'm going insane here. The dialogue is kind of terrible, but thankfully it's entertaining in a so bad it's good kind of way.
No! Epic stunt fail! No! Epic stunt fail!
So there's that at least. If you do end up hating the in-game banter between characters, the game thankfully does give you the option to mute it, but in the campaign you can't really do much about the cutscenes aside from skipping them. Although to give one notable exception, this scene is actually kind of funny.
I'm so gonna own you, Silver.
Okay.
No, you're supposed to say in your dreams, Sonic.
In your dreams, Sonic.
Too late. The moment's passed.
In order to progress in the campaign, you need to collect stars as rewards for beating races and fulfilling certain objectives, and then use those stars to unlock the next area, similar to Transform's World Tour mode. Unlike that mode, however, you can't really unlock any extra content with the stars you earn, like new characters or stages. It's only used for progression to the next area. You can also participate and earn medals and extra challenges if you need to earn stars and keys that way. I hear so many people complaining about how bad these challenges are way too often, so that's why as a completely sane individual, I went ahead and got the platinum ring for all of them. Truth be told, they aren't really bad at all. Some are actually quite fun. The Daredevil challenge, for instance, requires you to pass through checkpoints in order to score points. Yellow simply increases score, while red increases the point multiplier, with each boosted higher if you drift through them. It kinda makes it look like you need to drift through the entire course, but you really don't. All you need to do is this, and the game counts it all the same. On top of getting platinum in all the challenges, I also collected all the stars in adventure mode. Why did I do this? As I said prior, I am completely insane. You don't really get any reward for doing this, it's just for achievement fodder, so I don't really recommend doing this. I guess I just like torturing myself. Well, again, to call it torture is a bit of a stretch, but getting all stars in the campaign is very exhausting. Remember back when I said there's a lot of recycling in the campaign? Yeah, I wasn't kidding. You pretty much burn through almost all the tracks in the first third of story mode, and from then on, the rest of the matches are either repeats or mirror mode races. You can tell they were struggling to fill up the rest of the campaign. It's super tiring to go through. To shift the subject for a bit, when you complete a standard race, Grand Prix, or other challenge in the campaign, you earn credits which you can spend on mod pods. Essentially think of it like a loot box system, only far less psychologically manipulative. Mainly because you earn so many credits in-game and there is no option to spend real-world money on credits via microtransactions. Wouldn't it be nice if other kart racers learned this? But basically you spend 10 credits at a time to unlock mod pods, customization options for your vehicles, and let's just get this out of the way first and foremost. The amount of customization options you can apply to your vehicle is utterly insane. You can give it different engines, tires, front and back parts, you can add stickers and decals to it, customize the color scheme, the texture, even the freaking horn is customizable. It's ridiculous. This is all pretty commendable, and is something you can spend quite a while just tinkering around with, getting everything to be just the way you want it to be, creating a unique, dapper instrument of speed to show the world who you really are. Or, you can just give up, slap the legendary golden parts on everything, and drive around town like you're Scrooge McDuck. Either one works. Now, while the car customization feature is pretty cool, unlocking the customization parts is not. First off, the fact that you could get so many credits and yet only spend 10 at a time just for one single item is absolutely agonizing. Would it have killed them to give us a spend 100 credits or more option to get like 10 items at once instead of slowly, painfully unlocking them one by one? This is no way to live, man. And speaking of which, what you get in a mod pod is randomized, again, completely to a loot box system. You don't get any duplicates, of course. You will eventually get every custom part for every character if you spend enough credits. But if you're wanting a specific part for a specific character, you're kind of at mercy to the luck of a draw here. Personally, I think a shop system would have been much simpler and more fulfilling than this randomized reward system, honestly. Outside of adventure mode, you get the typical single and multiplayer offerings, standard races, Grand Prix, time trials, which are once again pretty difficult. The game even allows you to race solo instead of using the whole team mechanic, but like, why would you do this? The team mechanic is good. This is just the same game as previously, but even worse. And finally, you have the online mode, which is a robust, polished, incredibly populated test of your extreme skill as you compete with millions around the globe to see truly who is the better racer. I think it's no secret by now that the online in Team Sonic racing is notoriously awful. I didn't think it was even spectacular at launch when I played it with a couple of my friends, but now, good lord, nobody's playing this game online. It's a literal ghost town. There are more people playing Transforms online mode, and that's just kind of sad. I mentioned previously that this game was initially delayed from late 2018 into May 2019. Wanna know the reason why? Oh, it wasn't for added polish of the game itself. It was the online mode. Issues with online connection were the sole reason this game was pushed back to 2019, and the online is still this bad. Well, if that doesn't sum up a certified Sonic the Hedgehog franchise moment, I don't know what will. To summarize, I still think Team Sonic Racing is a good time. Certainly better than the first All-Stars game by a huge margin, but it's just nowhere near as good as Transform. The transforming vehicles were a ton of fun, and while the team mechanic is a great alternative to help the game stand out on its own, it's just not enough. Not to mention, the general handling, overall speed, and boosting is not as strong, and the general physics, while fine, can be super wacky, unpredictable, and even broken at times, like...
No! That's not how it's done!
Okay. In terms of presentation, well, I initially got the Switch version, but the PC version looks pretty clean. It's vibrant, colorful, runs smooth as butter. The vehicles themselves kind of look off, like a lot of them look way too shiny and somewhat plasticky, though admittedly that might just be from one of the texture options you can customize your car with, but it's still pretty good otherwise. I'd say the general presentation gets a solid A. I managed to have a fun time. I can still have a fun time whenever I go back to it. It's still a great racing title, it's just, you know, not as great as I hoped it would be. It also, like, barely goes on sale from my experience on Steam, so honestly, if you want to play this, wait for a price drop or for a bundle or sale event. Even at that base $40 price, I still think it's a bit too steep. And with that, it looks like we are finally done with the All-Stars Racing Series retrospective. Good lord, this was a long one. In hindsight, it probably would have been easier to stick with a single game review or discussion, but this is something I always wanted to get out, so I'm glad I got the opportunity to do so. Despite being a response to Mario Kart and nothing more, the All-Stars Racing Trilogy eventually turned into its own unique thing with a ton of creativity and variety, which is incredibly super exciting for the future. Sumo Digital has stated that they're down for making another All-Stars game, so who knows? We could end up getting an even better sequel to Transform down the line, or something new, incredibly innovative, and super different entirely. I don't really know what it could be, but I do know that when they decide to do it, if they decide to do it, based on my experience with their past work, I can easily say it's going to be in good hands. Or not, because Tencent might screw them over, there's always that, I guess.